What's up everyone? In this video, we're going to cover a few useful admin configurations in Payload CMS's admin UI, collections, globals, and fields. Before we get started though, make sure you're subscribed to my channel and getting notifications so you never miss when I release a video about Payload CMS, Next.js, and more. If you'd like to see the code that I used in this video, there's a link to the repo in the description. Now, let's dive in. We've covered a few admin customization options in the past, but now I wanted to take some time to dive deep into what you're able to do with these options, starting with additional admin config options in the admin panel. Any admin configurations you want to add to your admin panel will need to be defined in your payload config. This is where we've already set things like components and date format. Anything you configure here will apply to your entire payload admin UI, with a few exceptions that we'll go over shortly. The first option we'll cover in this video is the avatar. You can use this to set an account profile picture. You have the option to set this to default. So we'll do that here at the top of our admin prop. We can just add avatar and set it to be default. Now, when we save this and refresh, we can see that we just get this default icon in our admin UI. You can also set this to be gravatar, which will change the image to be a blue background with a sideways G on it. You're also able to return a React component here, which is what I'm going to opt to do. This allows a user to upload their own image to be used as their avatar across the payload admin UI. We can do this just like we would with any other React component. First, we'll need to add the ability for users to upload an image. We can go to our collections directory and open our users.ts file. And at the top of our fields here, we're going to add a new upload field called avatar with the relation to media. Now, when we save this, we can go to our users collection and we'll open our primary account here that we're currently logged into. And we can see that we have an avatar upload field right here. Let's go ahead now and choose from our existing images and use a picture of myself as our avatar. Now we need to render this on the front end. So we'll go to our components directory, admin, UI, and in here we're going to add a new TypeScript file called avatar.tsx, and we're going to import our types of media from payload types as well as our user. We're also going to import the image component from next image. We'll then export a new const called avatar and open an arrow function. And for our props, we're going to pass in the user, which has the type of user. Next, we'll create a const called avatar and set this equal to the image field we created earlier in our user config, which we called avatar. So we can use user avatar. We'll cast the type as media so we can process this better in our component. We'll then need to check if the avatar exists. If it does, we can return an image component, which takes a source, an alt, a height, and a width. So for our source, we'll add in our environment variable for our S3 bucket, and then also our avatar file name. For the alt, we can use avatar.alt with a height of 25 and a width also of 25, and then we can close that. If there is no avatar defined, we'll want to fall back. I copied the SVG that Payload uses for the default option, and we can use that if a user-selected avatar doesn't exist. So we'll create an else statement by adding else at the bottom of our if, and then I can return this SVG that I copied here in the else statement. As always, whenever you copy and paste an SVG from anywhere on the internet, be sure that the attributes match JSX rules or you might get errors. Finally, we're going to include our export default avatar at the end of our file here. Now let's use the component in our admin configuration. On the avatar prop, open up a new object instead of this gravatar here, and we can add our component option with the path prop included. So our path is going to be components admin UI avatar.tsx. And since I used a default export, we should see this work no problem. I can see that this is just a square image right now, so let's make it round by adding a style attribute to our image of border radius of 50%. So when I save this now, I can see that we have a nice avatar profile picture here in the top right of our admin UI. Now, if we click on this and remove our image and hit save, we can see that nothing will break and it'll just return back to the default SVG that we included in our component. The next option I want to cover is autoLogin. This allows you to set a default user to use to log into your admin dashboard without having to enter a password whenever your session expires. This comes in handy when you're in development, testing, or demo mode, but is definitely not recommended for production, as it will allow anyone to access your admin UI. I'll start by creating an environment variable called next public enable autoLogin and set it to true. Now I'm going to create a new user that'll be used just for our autoLogin, which will be our Nick plus test at midlowwebdesign.com, and we're going to set a simple password of test. I'm going to save that and definitely not save the password. Now that we've created our test user, let's log out. Now underneath our avatar, we're going to add our autoLogin option, which is first going to check if our environment variable of next public enable autoLogin is set to true. And if it is, we'll return a set of credentials, but if not, we'll return false. And for those credentials, we'll pass in the email and password that we just created. So nick plus test at midlowwebdesign.com, and our password, which is just test. Now, when I save this and come over to the admin panel, I'll be logged in immediately. This in itself will simply check an environment variable you set to determine if you're in production or not. I would encourage you to either delete your autoLogin user before going to production or using a development database like I am when you're still in development. Otherwise, if this user exists in your database and is published to a public repo, anyone will still be able to find it and log in with those credentials. Now, at any time, if I want to disable this, I can set my environment variable to false instead of true, and I'll be logged out. Now that I have this user, though, I'm going to stay logged in with it. We have our project configured to accept email only, but this also does work with usernames, which I'll cover how to handle in a future video. Next up is the meta prop. This is the root metadata that will apply to your whole admin UI. It includes things like favicons, title, description, and OpenGraph data. There are several options you can use in this property. So let's get started by opening up our meta option. So under our autoLogin, we can add meta, and we'll create a new object here. The first option is title suffix, which will add just a little bit of text to the end of our generated titles. Then we can also change the title, which we will just change to our blank payload example, and then add a description, which we can say is, this is an example to be used for educational purposes only. Now, when I save this and come to inspect our elements here and look in the head tag, we can see we have our meta description, which says this is an example to be used for educational purposes only. Then we have our title with the title suffix in there as well. As of version 3.28, you can include any other property that Next.js supports within the generate metadata function. This includes title and description like we just did, which accept string values, but it also includes props like generator, application name, referrer, keywords, authors, creator, publisher, and format detection. None of these are frequently used, but know that they are available. You can include an alternates object that accepts canonical and alternate languages, among other things. You can also include the icons option to set your favicon. We'll set ours using icons we've already added. Let's first add the icons prop to our meta tags here. We can add icons, and that takes an array. And we're going to pass in first our light mode option, which is going to have our environment variable for our S3 bucket. And I happen to know the file name is square12.png. And it's going to have a relationship of icon, and the icon's type is image/png. We'll include a few sizes for good measure, like 16 by 16, 32 by 32, and 64 by 64, and set the fetch priority to be high. We can also add a dark mode version of this by first copying everything that we just did there, changing the title to be just square 1, which is our dark mode icon, and adding the media prop, which we can add prefers color scheme dark. Now I'm using PNG because Safari and some other browsers don't accept WebP or any other kind of files for their favicons. That means PNG is supported by the most amount of browsers, so that's what I'm going to use here. Now, once we save and refresh, we can see that nothing really changes here in Safari for our favicon. But if I open up Chrome, I can see that the favicon has been updated here. Safari takes a while to update the favicon, but since we see it in Chrome, we can trust that it will work. To set specific OpenGraph tags, you can use the OpenGraph option. So we'll open a new object, and we can put in a title, which we'll just use blank payload example, a description, which is the same as what we did above. We can add site name, which is going to be blank payload example, and we can also include images if we'd like by including an array of objects with at least the URL defined. OpenGraph is used for things like social media sharing. So if you don't plan on sharing links to your dashboard on social media or any other kind of channel like that, feel free to skip OpenGraph options altogether. As of version 3.28, you can also set your Payload CMS robots using the meta option, which controls how search engines crawl your site. Typically, your admin UI shouldn't be public, so by default, Payload has this to be no index, no follow. But if you want to change this behavior, you can do that by replacing these options with any robots options that Next.js accepts. The next option we'll cover is the routes prop. And here you have two areas you can change. The first is route level routes. Your route level routes are the routes that include either the base path of the admin UI or anything else that doesn't include the admin path. To set this, you'll need to include the routes prop outside of your admin option. So we'll go above our admin option in our build config and include routes. And here it's going to accept an object. You can change the admin, API, GraphQL, and GraphQL playground routes here. So for example, I can change my admin route to be something like NLV codes instead. And we can change my API to be NLV API. Now that we've changed this, I'm getting an error saying that it can't find the payload import map folder. This is because changing the admin route also changes the project structure. So you'll need to change your admin directory in the payload folder to match what you just changed your admin to be. So we will refactor and rename this to be NLV codes and hit refactor. Now we get a 404 because we're still trying to go to the admin route, but if I change this to NLV codes, our admin UI pops back up and we can see down here that NLV API is our new API route. There are plenty of times when you might want to change these routes in order to be less predictable to bad actors. So just be mindful when you make these changes to also update the project. Since I'm not too worried about bad actors on this sample project, I'm going to switch things back to the default admin and API routes. But to leave the example up, I'm going to state them explicitly. The second set of routes you can change is admin level routes. This is everything that follows the admin path, like account, forgot, login, logout, and more. You can set these routes by adding a routes prop to your admin options. So I'll do that at the top here, where we can include routes and open a new object. So in this object, we'll change our logout route, which we'll set as log me out, and our account route, which we'll set to be my account. We can now see by going to our profile icon that our route is now admin/my account. However, since we made a custom logout component, we'll need to update that to our new route by going to the component and changing where the link is pointing. Let's future-proof this while we're at it. Let's go to our logout.tsx file in our UI folder here. And at the top of our file, we're going to import type config from our payload package as well as payload. We'll then pass our payload object with the type of payload assigned to it as our props. We'll then destructure our payload config cast as type of config and destructure it to admin and routes to get everything we need to future-proof this. Now we just need to update our href to be routes.admin and then followed by admin routes.logout. Now, no matter what our base admin or logout routes are, it will always update our logout button. We can see this in action after we restart our server. We see it switch from log out, and then when I refresh, we can see at the bottom that it now says log me out. The last root admin option I'll cover in this video is time zones, which was introduced in version 3.23. This option lets you configure your time zone settings by providing which time zones you want to support and which time zone is selected by default, which must be included in the supported time zones array. Underneath our routes here, we'll add our time zones option and open up an object. And we'll create a supported time zones array, which is going to take an array of objects with labels and values. So we'll set West Coast to be the first label, and the value is going to be America, Los Angeles. And below it, we'll include an East Coast time using New York. We can then set our default time zone to be Los Angeles, for example. So now when I save this and go to our blog posts, I can open up blog test 1. And if we refresh our post here, we see that date doesn't have a time zone attached to it yet. That's because anytime we use time zone, we have to enable it on the date field in the config we'd like it to show up. So for our date field, we'll set time zone to be true. And now that we have time zone set to true, we can look here in our blog post and see West Coast as the default time zone. We can publish those changes, and we can see it also in our schedule publish where the time zone is set to West Coast. Even with West Coast as the default, we can always change it using the time zone dropdown that now exists under our date field. Now, before we move on to collections and globals, if you're finding this content helpful, don't forget to check and make sure you're subscribed to my channel. These are the types of videos I make and will continue to make for Payload CMS, Next.js, and more. Now let's talk about the admin options that are available for configuration within collections and globals. 3 of the 4 options I'll cover here are shared between globals and collections, so I'll call out the differences between them when we get there. Let's start with the one option that's unique to collections. You can include the default columns you want to show up in the list view by including an array of string values that matches the name of top-level fields in your collection. This means that while you can include groups, arrays, and more as a column, you can't include any field that's nested within those groups or arrays as a default column. In the case of our post config, it looks like we'll want to include authors, title, date, and slug. Looking at our blog post list view, we only see title, email, and authors, as well as one other additional field that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to keep as our default columns. So at the top here in our admin, we can add our default columns as an array, and we're going to include our title, our slug, our date, and our authors. Now when I save this, we can see that our list view has updated. While it's not listed in my config, you can also include ID as a default column if you'd like to. All I need to do is simply add the ID string to this array, and as soon as it refreshes, we can see that the ID has been added. If you don't want your editors to see the button that shows the API response of your collection or global, you can disable that by setting hide API URL to true. So I'm going to do that now with hide API URL, and that is set to true. And now when I let this refresh, the API button goes away. And if I comment it out, we can see it reappear there. This will completely remove the API option from the edit view in both collections and globals where you include this option. I always find the API link helpful though, so I don't want to disable it while I'm in development mode. Luckily, we created an environment variable that enables autoLogin when set to true. Since this variable returns true, we need to flip the logic to make sure hide API URL is false, which we can do by using our environment variable, which is next public enable autoLogin, and set it to not equal true. This will return false when the variable is set to true in development mode, which keeps the API in my edit view, but will remove it when I push this to production. The next option that applies to both collections and globals is GraphQL. I don't like using GraphQL personally, so I can just disable this at the global level by going to my payload config and at the top of my build config, include GraphQL and set disable to true. However, if I want more control here, I can go to the collection or global I want to exclude from GraphQL. And then underneath the slug here, I can include GraphQL and set this to false. If you do use GraphQL, you can change the name that GraphQL generates for globals by going to any of your globals and using the GraphQL option, and then setting our name to be something like header GraphQL. You also have the ability to disable queries as well as mutations in your global. For collections, you have the same disable options that I mentioned for globals, but you can also include a singular name and a plural name instead of just a name option for globals. But since I have GraphQL disabled at the root level, I can just remove this because I won't be using GraphQL anyway. The last option I'll cover for globals and collections is the meta option. This is similar to the admin level metadata we discussed earlier. You can use this collection or global option to override what metadata Payload CMS returns at the collection or global level. Just as an example, we'll add a meta object that just includes our title suffix, and we'll set it to be NLV codes. And I can save this. Now when I add a tab, we can see the suffix changes to just NLV codes, and that'll be true for anywhere that we have our blog posts. But if I go back to the home page, we have the hyphen added back in because that is our global metadata right there. Now let's discuss the admin options that are available to you in your fields. These are the most granular controls you have, so there are plenty to use here. We'll start with condition. You can use condition to programmatically hide or show a field based on the value or state of another field. For example, let's create a checkbox field with the name of show blocks. And while we're at it, we're going to take our blocks array out of our content tab and add it below our checkbox here. We'll go into our blocks field and in the admin prop include a condition as an option. This takes a function which takes data and sibling data as props. We don't need data, but we do need the sibling data, which we can actually destructure into the field name of checkbox, which is going to be show blocks. We can then have this return show blocks, and since checkboxes return either true or false, this returns a Boolean value for me. Now we can load up our edit view of any blog post, and I can click show blocks here, and we can see our blocks array show up, and if I uncheck it, it goes away. This can be useful in making your dashboard more manageable by hiding fields you don't always need access to. There may be fields that you don't want in the normal flow of your dashboard. If that's the case, you can send them to the sidebar by including position sidebar to the admin config of any field. You're not able to do this with any nested fields like fields within our tabbed UI, so why don't we pull out our date field and put that in the sidebar? So we find our date field right here. We'll cut that out and put it below our blocks field and include in here our admin position sidebar. Now when I save that and zoom out, we can see our date field has been moved over to the sidebar just like our authors field here. Next up is width, which can be used within row fields to get multiple fields on one line. We don't have any row fields, but it makes sense to have title and slug in one. Let's find our title text field, and above it, we're going to create a new field of type row. Row fields need fields, arrays, and we can just include our text as the first field in that array, and then our slug as the next field in that array. We can then go into our admin options here, and we're going to type in width, and we'll put 50% for both, but that is the default value. So why don't we put 40% there and 60% here. And now when I save this, we can see now that our title and slug are put together. And while we're at it, why don't I remove this custom component here for our field so we can see that slug is taking up 60% of our row field and title is taking up 40%. You have the ability to add inline styles to any field as well by using admin style and passing in an object, just like you would with React on the front end. We'll use our title field as an example where we'll pass in the style object and we'll include a background color of red. Now, this is not something we would normally do, but I just wanted to show this as a clear example. So I'll go ahead and delete style there. You can also use the class name prop to add a class name to whatever field you'd like. Let's replace the background color that I just removed with the class name prop, which is going to take a string. We'll set our class name string to be title label, and then we'll go over to our payload directory and go into custom.scss. And we're going to add our title label and set the label itself to be font weight of bold. Now I can save this and we see that nothing happens. And that's because we have a custom label here. So let's go ahead and delete that custom label. And when this refreshes, we'll see that our title is there and it is bolded. The last option we'll go over is the hidden option. This takes a Boolean value to either apply the hidden input type or leave a value shown. Regardless, any information included in the field will be saved to the database, but it won't be visible to editors. As an example, let's hide our text area field by adding admin hidden set to true. We can then see that our plain text field disappears. However, we do still see it saved in our API as our plain text field. Now, if we go to our front end directory, then we go to our post slug page, we can add this to our content by adding our post.plaintext. And when we refresh and go to our post page, at the bottom here, we can see this is an example of a meta description, which is what the plain text reads. And that's it for admin options across your admin UI, collections, globals, and fields. In this video, I included options I use often, but there are still more options to choose from. Be sure to check out the documentation to see if there's anything I didn't cover that might be useful to you. If you found this video helpful, please like it and share it with others who might also find it useful. Check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel and receiving notifications so you never miss when I release more content around Payload CMS, Next.js, and more. If you have suggestions or questions, please leave those in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.